Okay, I just want to recap on a couple of things. You know, I was talking about the earlier metal influences. If you look for more in the lines of the death metal vocal, probably the roots of that you'd find in Boris the Spider by The Who. It's a John Entwistle song which he sings. You could also probably find that element in Pink Floyd's One of These Days I'm Gonna Cut You Into Little Pieces off the Metal album. Another track you could find where, you know, the heavy sound was coming into play was on Emerson, Lake and Palmer's first album called The Barbarian. Guitar harmonies, if you look at Jethro Tull's To Cry You a Song off the Benefit album, 1970, and again, another big influence on Iron Maiden. You look through their whole career, even that track you could find The Break was borrowed for Iron Maiden's Charlotte the Harlot. And you know, you can find a bunch of stuff. If you know another band, if you could investigate, would, you know, be good is Sir Lord Baltimore. But you know, these are the roots. You're not going to find, you know, heavy front to back on these albums, but you'll find some roots of heavy metal and a lot of, you know, decent stuff in some of these bands I'm mentioning. But now it's like, you know, take it up to 1973, 74. You had other bands coming on the scene like Rush, Judas Priest, the Scorpions, who were starting to, you know, bring another generation of a heavy sound, and actually Styx. If you catch some of their earlier stuff, you can find some heavy stuff. I think there's one called Serpents Rising, where I think the actual track you could see influenced the beginning of Motley Crue's Shout at the Devil. You know, like I said, if you want to do your homework, check this stuff out. I mean, if you really, you know, want to know the roots and if you care that much. But you know, Rush came in, they started, you know, they used the heavy roots that Black Sabbath was using. So did you know, Judas Priest, the Scorpions. They were beginning to use, you know, the roots, the four major bands, like I said before, Black Sabbath, Deep Purple, Led Zeppelin, and Alice Cooper. You know, they were the strong points from there on in. The Scorpions brought in guitar harmonies, and they would use the fourths, which gave it a different type of sound. Rush, of course, was, you know, bringing the speed in as well. You know, they brought, you know, these bands are bringing this heavy element in, but using it across the board on a lot of their albums. Judas Priest brought it up a notch in 1977 on their Sin After Sin, when they wrote the song Dissident Aggressor, which was covered by Slayer later on. But using double bass action or whatever. Trying to remember the you know, Rush, of course, was in there. A lot of influences of the later bands. The Scorpions, which I know the Scorpions' 80s stuff all were power ballads and anthem rockers, but in the 70s the Scorpions had some really good heavy and fast stuff. Uriah Heep was in there. Unfortunately, like I said, you know, Uriah Heep's one of those bands you know, find maybe 3 good, probably you could call heavy metal songs in their albums, but the rest aren't. 1978, Van Halen came on the scene. Merciful Fate, you know, which, you know, these were another, you know, stepping stones into the heavy metal genre. Motorhead, which is, you know, has been prevalent by now, of course. But Van Halen, you have to look past the pop songs and the jumps and the Panamas, because if you look at songs like they put out, like Loss of Control and Light Up the Sky, you know, that's probably more closer into where the heavy metal roots were. Merciful Fate, of course, with King Diamond. Forgive me if I'm missing some here. I'm trying to put this in a nutshell. Good album if you want to, you know, live album, Jethro Tull Bursting Out. If you get past the flute, you know, which there is some good metal and a lot of Maiden influence. The track called Conundrum, which is an instrumental where you could hear pieces that influenced Aces High. And 79, the Blizzard of Oz came on the scene, which was actually a super group, because you had Ozzy from Black Sabbath, Randy Rhoads from Quiet Riot, you had Bob Daisley coming out of Rainbow, you had, you know, Lee Kerslake coming out of Uriah Heep. But even Rainbow, I forgot to mention, 1975, Dio came on the scene with Rainbow, and that brought metal up another notch, you know, brought speed back into it, the vocal style. You know, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with Dio, but the early Rainbow stuff, Rising and and Long Live Rock and Roll, especially Kill the King, great track. You know, Light to Black off of Rising, another great one. But then you have, you know, the Blizzard of Oz, which, you know, set the pace for metal in the 80s, where, you know, you had Randy Rhoads' virtuoso guitar playing, and not only that, still the greatest lead guitarist ever. Not a wasted note. He had fast chops. You know, he unlike Eddie Van Halen, who tapped out his triplets, Randy Rhoads would pick them out, which is a guitarist, you know, guitarists would know that that's, you know, a lot more difficult way of playing them. But Randy Rhoads, you know, he put it up a notch. It wasn't about flash. It was about using the notes and effects for the right things in the right places, and still the greatest ever. But, you know, that brought the metal scene up a notch. And then, you know, in '82, a bunch of other bands came out, you know, to bring metal up another notch. Metallica, which is known. Manowar, who pretty much started, you know, pushing the scene up in England, in Europe rather. Slayer, who brought speed into it. Dave Lombardo's crazy, you know, double bass drum, and you know, who else are we missing here? And then Suicidal Tendencies, of course. They were like coming in from the underground. Then you know, Judas Priest was still carrying on. Iron Maiden and Def Leppard, 1980. I forgot to mention, you know, Def Leppard's first album, On Through the Night. You could definitely find, you know, some metal happening on that album. Iron Maiden, who actually mixed the elements of prog from back in the 70s with the punk energy, and Maiden developed a new sound using like harmony guitars. And afterwards, in 1983, Black Sabbath got Ian Gillan into the band, and that kind of mixed the element of those, you know, screaming vocals with the heavy riffs, and, you know, Trash, which was the famous song off the album. But the one track on there that brought metal up another notch is Disturbing the Priest, which, you know, used the dissonant chords and, you know, disturbing lyrics, but it was a great heavy metal song, and again brought it up a notch. And then in 1986, Metallica's Master of Puppets is the album that just, you know, just set the standard for the sound, for what metal would be after that. You know, Master of Puppets was, you know, their masterpiece. And a lot of people believe that Metallica sold out after Injustice for All, but it's tough to say they sold out because two major elements in their earlier music was missing. Dave Mustaine, who did a lot of writing on the first two albums, and Cliff Burton, who helped give them direction and develop their sound and the energy, which he was influenced by the Misfits, which was a big influence on you know, metal as well, with the speed and the energy. And so that's where, you know, Metallica went. And as far as the rap metal mix, which I seen on the documentary, stating that Faith No More, which is a total misconception, because that's not the cross of rap and metal. If you want credit to anybody, you go back to 1986 to Suicidal Tendencies on Join the Army. Okay, you know, the MTV and the VH1 is the more commercial views of these, you know, who started what things. But if you go to 1986, you go Join the Army with Suicidal Tendencies. They brought the element in, they brought the lyrics in. They were the first metal band to be singing about homeboys. This is pre-Biohazard, pre-Rage Against the Machine. But if you want to go even farther back to the roots, you probably have to go back to Deep Purple's Fireball track, No One Came, which actually the riff was, you know, somewhat borrowed by Rage Against the Machine for one of their famous songs back in the 90s, if you want to go for that, you know, the rap metal cross. But, you know, these are the roots and the elements of heavy metal that I found through the years. You know, you went to the 90s, of course, you know what, if anyone considers bands like Poison or Limp Bizkit heavy metal, they're not. Those aren't the elements. Heavy metal needs to be heavy, it's got to be fast, it's got to have horror elements, it has to have a dark side to it. This is where heavy metal's roots came from. This is what true heavy metal is. And plus Black Sabbath, a lot of people cite them as influences, but if you go back to the Paranoid album, there is not one song on that album that has a chorus. You know, a lot of the songwriting, what the element was from the early days, when you saw a band with long hair, that meant that they were rebellious, and that meant that you were going to get something new and different. Okay? And that's what heavy metal has to be. Something that brings something new and different to the table.